Stories and Documentary Network.
Hidden within the dense jungles and winding rivers of Sumatra, nestled along the ancient trade routes of maritime Southeast Asia, lies the tale of a kingdom long overshadowed by the grandeur of Srivijaya and the majesty of Majapahit. This is the story of the Melayu Kingdom, a civilization that flourished at the crossroads of culture, commerce, and conquest, yet today remains obscured in the footnotes of history. Known to early Chinese travelers as Mo Lo Yu and referenced in Sanskrit texts as Malayu, this enigmatic polity emerged as a critical power in the early medieval period, controlling vital maritime arteries and influencing the cultural and political landscape of the region. To understand the significance of the Melayu Kingdom, one must first appreciate its geographic fortune. Located in the southern reaches of Sumatra, near present-day Jambi and possibly extending into the highlands of West Sumatra, the kingdom occupied a territory rich in natural resources, most notably gold, camphor, and resin. Its position at the heart of maritime Southeast Asia granted it privileged access to the bustling trade networks that connected India, China, and the Middle East. The kingdom's proximity to the Malacca Strait, one of the busiest maritime passages in the ancient world, placed it directly on the axis of transcontinental commerce. Ships carrying spices, silks, precious stones, and religious ideas would dock along the kingdom's riverine ports, transforming the region into a melting pot of cultures and beliefs. This strategic location did not go unnoticed by the great civilizations of antiquity. As early as the 7th century, Chinese annals referenced Mo Lo Yu in their records. In particular, the Tangshu, Old Book of Tang, and the writings of Chinese emissaries such as Yi Jing and Zhao Rugua documented the presence of a significant kingdom in Sumatra that sent tribute missions to the Tang court. Yi Jing, a Buddhist monk who traveled to India and stopped in the region around 671 CE, noted that a journey from Malayu to Srivijaya took 15 days by sea, suggesting that both polities coexisted and perhaps competed for influence in the region. Indian sources too, such as inscriptions found in the Nalanda monastery, suggest diplomatic and religious links between the Indian subcontinent and Malayu, particularly through the spread of Mahayana Buddhism. Yet the significance of Malayu cannot be confined to mere geography. The kingdom embodied a pivotal stage in the development of Southeast Asia's political evolution, from tribal chiefdoms to complex centralized states. The very name Malayu would, over centuries, transcend its original political boundaries to become the foundation of a broader ethnic and cultural identity. Malayu or Malay, a term that would come to define an entire region's people, language, and worldview. But in the shadow of its more documented contemporaries, why has the Melayu Kingdom faded from popular memory? Part of the reason lies in the elusive nature of its archaeological footprint. Dense tropical forests have concealed many of its ancient settlements, and shifting river courses have washed away or buried the evidence of its urban life. Unlike the stone temples of Java or the monumental stupas of Burma, the architectural remnants of Malayu were built primarily from organic materials, wood, bamboo, and thatch, making their survival across centuries precarious at best. Despite this, recent archaeological and epigraphic discoveries have begun to shed light on the kingdom's complexity. Inscriptions such as the Amogapasa inscription of 1286 CE, issued by the Javanese king Kertanagara of Singhasari and discovered in the upper Batanghari River Valley, reveal both the political alliances and the spiritual traditions that connected Malayu to the broader Indic world. The gifting of the Amogapasa statue, a symbol of Buddhist compassion, illustrates how religion and diplomacy were deeply intertwined in the region's statecraft. Trade, too, played a critical role in Malayu's ascent. Gold, long synonymous with Sumatra in foreign records, became a cornerstone of its economy and a lure for foreign merchants. The ancient world often referred to Sumatra and its hinterlands as Suvarnadvipa, the island of gold. This abundance, coupled with the kingdom's political stability and control of river routes, positioned Malayu as an intermediary between inland resource zones and maritime trading hubs. In time, the fortunes of the Melayu Kingdom would rise and fall with the tides of empire. At its height, it challenged the supremacy of Srivijaya, and at times, appears to have been incorporated into or allied with it. Later, as Javanese kingdoms such as Majapahit expanded their influence, Malayu's autonomy was gradually eroded. And yet, its legacy lived on. not only in the annals of Chinese and Indian chroniclers, but also in the identity of a people and a language that continue to shape Southeast Asia to this day. Long before the Melayu Kingdom rose to prominence, the lush tropical island of Sumatra was a cradle of early Austronesian culture. Nestled amid the rich biodiversity and traversed by mighty rivers, Sumatra became a melting pot where Indian, Chinese, and local traditions intermingled. The early historical identity of the Melayu Kingdom, also referred to in Chinese records as Mo Lo Yu and in Sanskrit inscriptions as Melayu, emerged from this complex interaction of geography and maritime trade. Evidence of the Melayu Kingdom's early development can be traced to inscriptions like the Padang Roko and accounts in Chinese chronicles, which describe the region as a significant trading polity by the 7th century CE. Although often overshadowed by the more dominant Srivijaya Empire, Melayu played a key role in shaping early Malay civilization. It developed in a time when Sumatra was divided into a mosaic of small principalities and port cities, each competing for regional dominance and influence over lucrative trade routes. The initial power center of the Melayu Kingdom is believed to have been located near present-day Jambi, along the Batang Hari River. This fertile river valley provided ideal conditions for agriculture and also served as a crucial artery connecting the interior with the Strait of Malacca, a key maritime corridor between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. From this inland position, the Melayu elites orchestrated trade in local goods such as gold, camphor, resins, and forest products, exchanging them for Indian textiles, Chinese ceramics, and Middle Eastern glassware. The influence of Indian culture became increasingly evident during this period. Sanskrit became the language of inscriptions and elite communication, while local rulers adopted Indianized titles and court rituals. Buddhism and Hinduism both found fertile ground in Melayu, with Mahayana Buddhism in particular gaining significant traction, as evidenced by religious artifacts, statues, and temple ruins found in the region. The royal elite built monastic complexes and sponsored learned monks, who traveled between Melayu, India, and other parts of Southeast Asia. This period also marked the rise of a centralized monarchy. Unlike the earlier tribal structures, the Melayu Kingdom began to formalize a dynastic system of governance, possibly modeled on Indian political theories such as the Mandala system, where power radiated from a central authority outward to dependent territories. The emergence of such governance allowed the Melayu rulers to exert more consistent control over trade, military organization, and religious patronage, creating a more cohesive political identity. Despite its inland beginnings, the Melayu Kingdom gradually expanded toward the coast. It is likely that this coastal shift was driven by a desire to directly control the spice trade and to defend against pirate incursions or rival powers. This expansion also facilitated greater interaction with maritime traders from as far as Arabia and China, embedding the kingdom more deeply into the global trade networks of the time. Yet the rise of Melayu was not unchallenged. Srivijaya, based further south in Palembang, regarded Melayu as both a partner and a rival. The two kingdoms likely oscillated between alliances and hostilities, sharing religious and cultural ties while competing for supremacy. Chinese sources describe how the Srivijayan rulers eventually subsumed Melayu under their control by the 7th or 8th century, though the relationship may have been more nuanced. A suzerainty where Melayu retained local autonomy while recognizing Srivijaya's hegemony. The formative period of the Melayu Kingdom laid the groundwork for a distinctive Malay identity, rooted in local traditions but deeply influenced by trans-regional connections. This hybrid character would come to define not only the Melayu Kingdom itself, but also the broader Malay world that emerged in later centuries. By the 8th to 11th centuries CE, the Melayu Kingdom reached what many scholars describe as its golden age. Situated in the heart of maritime Southeast Asia, the kingdom became not just a cultural center, but a strategic nexus of economic power. At this time, the broader region was defined by a web of maritime networks connecting India, China, Arabia, and even East Africa, and Melayu was ideally positioned to thrive within this globalizing context. The Batang Hari River remained the lifeline of the kingdom, connecting the inland capital to bustling coastal ports. From these hubs, merchants exported Sumatran gold, a resource that earned the kingdom its fabled nickname as the Golden Land. Gold dust, collected from riverbeds and forest streams, became a prized commodity in foreign markets. Alongside it, Melayu exported aromatic woods like gaharu and benzoin, camphor, cloves, and rare jungle produce highly sought after in Chinese medicine and Middle Eastern perfumery. Melayu's strategic position on the eastern coast of Sumatra, near the Strait of Malacca, placed it at the crossroads of east-west trade. The strait served as a maritime highway, and Melayu's ports became essential stopovers for ships en route between the Indian subcontinent and the Tang and Song courts of China. Chinese annals during the Tang dynasty referred to Melayu as a rich and powerful state, and the Song dynasty continued sending envoys and merchants to its shores. These exchanges brought Chinese ceramics, silks, and coins, which have been unearthed by archaeologists at former Melayu sites. Indian traders, meanwhile, strengthened religious and cultural bonds. While Hinduism and Buddhism continued to coexist in the region, Mahayana Buddhism became particularly prominent. The Melayu rulers became known as patrons of Buddhist scholarship and art, and evidence suggests that they maintained close relations with the great Indian Buddhist universities like Nalanda. It is possible that monks from Melayu studied abroad, and visiting Indian scholars were welcomed at local monasteries. Religious tolerance and syncretism flourished during this time, with Buddhist doctrine blending seamlessly with local animist beliefs and Hindu rituals. Royal diplomacy also played a vital role in expanding Melayu's influence. The kingdom sent tribute missions to Chinese emperors, receiving official recognition and prestige. These diplomatic gestures were not merely symbolic. They often secured trade rights and protection for Melayu merchants in Chinese ports. Some scholars believe that Melayu also engaged in diplomatic relations with other Southeast Asian states, including the Khmer Empire and kingdoms in Java, occasionally exchanging emissaries and marrying into regional elites to cement alliances. Internally, the Melayu Kingdom further centralized its administration. The capital, possibly located near Muara Jambi, became a sophisticated urban center with monumental Buddhist temples, large reservoirs, and a well-planned road network. The architectural remains found at Muara Jambi, temple ruins, meditation halls, stupas, and stone inscriptions, reflect a society that had achieved a high degree of organization and spiritual ambition. These monuments were built using locally fired bricks and followed Indian architectural patterns, yet with unique Sumatran innovations in design and layout. The Melayu court was deeply involved in religious life. The king was viewed not only as a political ruler, but as a dharmic leader, a guardian of cosmic order who patronized the building of sacred structures and the preservation of Buddhist texts. The clergy and scholars surrounding the king played a key role in both religious affairs and court politics, often serving as advisors, scribes, and diplomats. However, the Melayu Kingdom was never isolated from regional tensions. The powerful Srivijaya Empire, headquartered further south in Palembang, continued to assert dominance over Melayu. Although Chinese texts often refer to the region under the name Srivijaya, it is likely that Melayu retained a degree of autonomy, especially during Srivijaya's decline in the 11th century, following raids by the Chola dynasty of South India. After this weakening, Melayu reasserted itself and may have even acted as a successor to Srivijaya's maritime influence. In fact, some historical interpretations suggest that the Melayu Kingdom, with its inland base and external connections, became the cultural and spiritual heir to Srivijaya's legacy. While Palembang suffered decline, Melayu's inland capital endured and even flourished. As regional power centers shifted, Melayu adapted by strengthening its role as a religious sanctuary and intellectual hub, which may explain the growth of Muara Jambi as a Buddhist pilgrimage site well into the 12th and 13th centuries. As the kingdom matured, it faced growing competition from new maritime powers in Java and the Malay Peninsula. The rise of the Singasari and later Majapahit empires in Java introduced a new era of political consolidation, and by the 13th century, these powers began asserting influence over Sumatra. Still, Melayu held its ground, continuing to serve as a respected religious and trade center, even as the regional balance of power began to shift. As with many powerful civilizations throughout history, the decline of the Melayu Kingdom was not caused by a single event, but rather by a slow and complex interplay of political shifts, regional rivalries, environmental changes, and ideological transformations. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the golden days of Melayu were waning, and the forces that had once sustained it, trade, religion, and diplomacy, began to realign in favor of newer rising powers in the region. One of the most significant challenges came from Java. The Singasari Kingdom, and later its more formidable successor, the Majapahit Empire, began asserting influence over Sumatra and the Strait of Malacca. With a powerful navy and vast territorial ambitions, Majapahit extended its control across maritime Southeast Asia, including parts of the Sumatran coast. In their records and chronicles, Majapahit authors occasionally reference Melayu, indicating its inclusion, either in direct control or as a tributary state. While this did not result in the complete subjugation of the Melayu heartland, it did curtail its regional autonomy and disrupted the networks it had long depended on. At the same time, the northern parts of Sumatra began to see the rise of new port cities and trading communities that would eventually play a transformative role in the region. The most prominent among these was the Sultanate of Samudra Pasai, located further north along the coast. Founded in the late 13th century, Pasai rapidly became a vital node in the Indian Ocean trade and a major center for the spread of Islam in Southeast Asia. The emergence of Islam brought a new cultural and religious dynamic to the archipelago. While the Melayu Kingdom had long been a center of Mahayana Buddhism, the spread of Islam presented both a challenge and an opportunity. Muslim traders from Gujarat, Persia, and Arabia brought with them not only goods, but also religious ideas and missionaries who established madrasas, mosques, and Sufi lodges. These coastal communities began to adopt Islam gradually, often through intermarriage and trade relations, and eventually influenced the inland regions. For Melayu, this religious shift marked the beginning of a cultural transformation. Although Buddhism continued to flourish in some parts of its territory, the momentum was shifting. Archaeological evidence suggests that many of the grand Buddhist temple complexes, like those in Muara Jambi, began to fall into disuse. Their gradual abandonment may have been due to the loss of royal patronage, changing religious demographics, or shifts in trade routes that made the inland centers less strategically important. Some scholars argue that Melayu adapted by slowly Islamizing over time, integrating Islamic teachings into existing political structures rather than experiencing a violent overthrow or abrupt conversion. Others suggest that the kingdom faded away as coastal Islamic polities, better suited to the maritime economy and regional trade, gained prominence and attracted merchant and elite support. Either way, the Islamization of Sumatra signaled the end of the Buddhist-centric world that Melayu had represented. Another crucial factor in the decline of Melayu was environmental. Rivers like the Batang Hari, once essential for transportation and agriculture, began to silt up. Changes in monsoon patterns, deforestation, and overuse of land may have contributed to a decline in agricultural productivity. As inland connections weakened, the economic center of gravity shifted toward the coast. The formerly vibrant inland capital found itself increasingly isolated from the great currents of regional commerce. In this vacuum of power, other Sumatran and peninsular kingdoms rose to prominence. The Malaccan Sultanate, founded around 1400 CE on the Malay Peninsula, became the dominant maritime and commercial power in the region. Malacca not only controlled the Strait of Malacca but also became the primary seat of Islamic learning, attracting scholars, traders, and adventurers from across the Muslim world. Its success symbolized a shift in the regional order, from inland Buddhist monarchies like Melayu to coastal Muslim sultanates with strong naval and commercial capacities. Despite its decline, the legacy of the Melayu Kingdom did not vanish. Cultural memories persisted through oral traditions, royal genealogies, and local myths. Some of the ruling elites of later Islamic sultanates in Sumatra claimed descent from the ancient kings of Melayu, using this lineage to bolster their legitimacy. The symbolism of an ancient golden kingdom continued to resonate in collective memory, often idealized as a land of wealth, wisdom, and spiritual power. Remnants of Melayu's grandeur still lie scattered across the landscape. The temples of Muara Jambi, partially restored, stand as silent witnesses to a forgotten epic, Brick structures once covered in intricate carvings now lie weathered by centuries of rain and jungle. Inscriptions found at these sites, written in Old Malay and Sanskrit, offer fleeting glimpses into a time when Melayu was a beacon of civilization in Southeast Asia. By the 15th century, the Melayu Kingdom had largely disappeared from historical records as a political entity. Yet its cultural and spiritual legacy endured. The blending of Indic, local, and Islamic traditions that characterized later Sumatran societies owes much to the syncretic worldview first cultivated in Melayu. In many ways, the kingdom served as a bridge between the ancient Buddhist past of Southeast Asia and the Islamic present that would shape the region's modern history. For centuries after its decline, the Melayu Kingdom remained a shadowy presence in Southeast Asian history, a name half-remembered in legends, inscriptions, and foreign travelogues. Yet despite its fading from political relevance, the essence of Melayu endured in the cultural DNA of the region. It continued to shape the identity of later kingdoms, inspired local myths, and gradually attracted scholarly attention in the modern era. This chapter explores how the kingdom's legacy persisted and how modern archaeology, historiography, and nationalism helped bring the story of Melayu back into the light. The earliest echoes of Melayu's legacy were preserved not in elaborate manuscripts or carved monuments, but in the names and genealogies of later rulers who sought to root their authority in the prestige of ancient times. Several Malay sultanates, including those of Johor, Palembang, and even Malacca, claimed descent from the rulers of Srivijaya and Melayu. By aligning themselves with these fabled predecessors, they sought to inherit not only their perceived divine right to rule, but also the cultural legitimacy of a golden era. In many of these claims, the word Melayu was used both as an ethnic marker and a political ideal. This symbolic continuity extended to language as well. The Old Malay used in inscriptions from the Melayu era laid the foundation for the classical Malay that later evolved as a lingua franca throughout maritime Southeast Asia. The courtly vocabulary, religious phrases, and poetic styles found in Malay literature from the 16th century onwards owe much to these earlier traditions. Even in modern Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Malaysia, echoes of the language spoken in ancient Melayu persist, linking the present to a distant past. By the 19th century, colonial scholars and explorers, particularly Dutch and British, began documenting the ruins and remnants of the Melayu Kingdom. The temples of Muara Jambi attracted attention for their size and age, though they were often misattributed or poorly understood at the time. Early European descriptions, while marred by exoticism and occasional inaccuracies, played a role in preserving knowledge of these sites. As archaeology began to develop as a scientific discipline, more systematic excavations were undertaken in the 20th century, especially in post-independence Indonesia. The rediscovery of Muara Jambi, long buried in jungle and legend, was a turning point in the understanding of Melayu's historical significance. The complex, spread across a vast floodplain along the Batanghari River, revealed a sophisticated urban and religious center. Brick shrines, stupas, ceremonial platforms, and irrigation systems painted a picture of a kingdom deeply immersed in Buddhism and Indic culture. The architecture showed affinities with Nalanda in India, suggesting active cultural exchange, and perhaps even the movement of monks, scholars, and artisans between the Indian subcontinent and Sumatra. Inscriptions found at Muara Jambi and other sites, written in Old Malay using Palava or Kawi scripts, have become vital primary sources for historians reconstructing the political, religious, and linguistic history of the region. They tell of kings who performed great religious rituals, who ruled justly under the Mandala system, and who maintained diplomatic and religious relations with other great civilizations of their time. These texts offer rare insight into a world where maritime trade, spiritual devotion, and royal power were seamlessly intertwined. Modern Indonesian historians and archaeologists, particularly during the nation-building decades following independence, increasingly embraced the Melayu Kingdom as a symbol of national pride and cultural heritage. While earlier historiography often focused on the better-known Srivijaya or Majapahit empires, Melayu began to gain recognition as a key bridge between the Buddhist maritime empires and the later Islamic sultanates that shaped the modern Indonesian state. In textbooks, museums, and public memory, Melayu now occupies a firm place in the narrative of Indonesia's ancient past. This renewed interest has been aided by interdisciplinary approaches that combine archaeology, linguistics, environmental science, and comparative religion. For example, recent studies of river sedimentation patterns and pollen samples from the Batang Hari Basin have offered clues about how environmental factors may have influenced the rise and fall of the kingdom. Others have examined trade ceramics and numismatic evidence to trace Melayu's integration into global trade networks, stretching from the Middle East to China. The rediscovery of Melayu has also had a spiritual and cultural impact. Pilgrims and local devotees now visit the ruins of Muara Jambi not only for historical reasons, but also for religious observance. The site has become a place of Buddhist pilgrimage, particularly for practitioners from Indonesia, Thailand, and Sri Lanka, who see it as a lost center of learning akin to Nalanda or Borobudur. Annual festivals and heritage preservation efforts have transformed what was once a neglected site into a vibrant cultural destination. Yet the story of Melayu remains incomplete. Much of the kingdom's history is still buried, literally and figuratively. Large portions of the Muara Jambi complex remain unexcavated, and many smaller satellite sites have yet to be studied in detail. Oral traditions held by local communities may hold further clues to ancient practices, sacred geographies, and lost knowledge. With increasing support from academic institutions and cultural ministries, future research may yet reveal more secrets of this ancient kingdom. Perhaps most importantly, the memory of Melayu challenges conventional boundaries between civilizations. It was not a rigidly defined state, but a fluid cultural zone, shaped by local innovations and global connections. It was both Buddhist and Indic, yet also uniquely Sumatran. Its rulers navigated between diplomacy and devotion, war and trade, rooted in their rivers and yet reaching across oceans. In this complexity lies its true legacy, not just as a historical kingdom, but as a symbol of Southeast Asia's dynamism and diversity. Today, as Southeast Asia continues to grapple with questions of identity, heritage, and modernization, the story of Melayu offers a mirror. It reflects how civilizations rise and fall, how cultures blend and adapt, and how memories, no matter how ancient, can still shape the future. The forgotten Kingdom of Gold has returned, not as an empire, but as a testament to the enduring spirit of a region that has always been at the crossroads of the world.